This morning's reading is Matthew chapter 13, verses 10 to 17, and then verses 34 to 35. The disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" He replied, "Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and hear what you hear, but did not hear it." And then verse 34, Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. "I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world."
Good morning, everyone. It's great to have you here. Particularly welcome if you're a visitor, as Charlie has already said. I'm Andy, I'm the other minister here. And we're beginning to think about a series on parables of the kingdom. But I want to begin here. I missed a slide. The title theme that was The Next Generation, which is my favourite, I think, of all the Star Treks, which ran in the late 80s and the early 90s. Some of you are far too young, which worries me. I think that's one of the more iconic introductions to any TV series ever. Space, the final frontier, and the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission to explain new worlds, to seek out new life, new civilization, to boldly go where no one has gone before. We're not sure about the last bit, but over the next few weeks, we're going to be exploring a strange new world together. The mystery that is God's kingdom, the house of love that Charlie used as a title last week. The house of love, animated by God's own love and God's own presence. So that's where we're going, boldly. I heard a tutor at college who used to say that to boldly go did more damage to the English language because it was a split infinitive. And we go boldly rather than boldly go, but I've forgotten a lot of what he said, but I can't get that out of my mind. Anyway, we're in Matthew's Gospel, and we're going to spend the next few weeks exploring chapter 13. If you've been with us so far, we started Matthew's Gospel at the beginning of last year, and we've been slowly working our way through, dipping out, dipping back in. But Matthew's Gospel is organised around 5 blocks of teaching interspersed with action. So there on the screen, you have the Sermon on the Mount, and then there was a section looking at healing and miracles. And then Jesus teaching on mission in chapter 10, and then 11 and 12, seeing how people responded to Jesus in various ways. And then chapter 13, our third block of teaching. And Jesus is talking about the kingdom of God. And it contains a whole series of what we call parables. Parables are essentially short stories, or extended metaphors even, which start with something that would have been very familiar to a first century audience, but which then takes a twist or a turn and disorientates maybe. as a way of describing what God's kingdom is like. So this is some of what we've got coming. Kingdom of heaven is like someone who sowed good seed in his field. It's like a mustard seed, again, which someone took and sowed. It's like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with flour until all of it was leavened. It's like treasure hidden in a field. It's like a merchant in search of fine pearls. It's like a net thrown into the sea. And on each of them, it starts with, as I say, something familiar, and then by the end, the audience are not quite sure where we've got to. The point being that God's kingdom operates in a different way to the world that we're used to. You need to start with a whole new mindset if you're to understand this strange new world. First parable is the sower who sowed good seed in the field, and we're going to come back to that next week. I'm going to give us more of a general introduction, and I want to look at what happens next. So not the first bit, but the second bit in chapter 13. And the disciples are struggling to understand why Jesus speaks in parables. They're struggling to make sense of them. They just wish that Jesus would speak a bit more clearly and use a few less riddles. So Jesus explains. The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing they do not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they understand. Sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? Jesus seems to be saying that his aim is to hide the truth as much as to reveal the truth. I wonder what Ofsted would make of that. Can you imagine an Ofsted instructor grilling Jesus, asking him for his lesson plan and coming across that? I suspect it would not go down well. So what's going on? Well, to start with, the they that you hear here is Israel. Jesus is talking about the religious establishment, the rich, the powerful, all who have a stake in the status quo, all who benefit from the way that life is currently done, the way that religion is currently done. And he goes on to remind them of some of Isaiah's teaching. This is Isaiah talking about his own ministry, his own mission. And Isaiah says, you will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You'll be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears. They have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn. And I would heal them. The point that Isaiah is making is that God's people have been resisting him for so long that their hearts have become damaged. Their ears have become waxed up. It's like they were seeing through a thick fog. They'd resisted God for so long that they'd actually lost the capacity to hear what God was saying, to recognize God's voice, since they'd reaped what they'd sown. Their arrogance, their self-righteousness, their greed, their pride, their sin had rendered them spiritually deaf and blind. Isaiah is going to preach, and Isaiah is going to give his message, and they won't respond. And so their spiritual barrenness, if you like, is laid bare. And Jesus says now this pattern is being repeated. The fact that the important religious people, the ministers, the deacons, the elders, the whoever, they don't recognize what's going on. They don't see God at work. And that just shows how far away they have turned from God. Jesus would heal them in an instant, but they don't know that they're sick. They lack God awareness, and they lack self-awareness. I guess to probably use a more general illustration, if you consistently choose to hate, you will begin to see the world through a hateful lens, and eventually you'll become blind to love. If you consistently choose self-centeredness, your worldview will become me, me, me. If you consistently choose to see the worst in people, then you'll become suspicious of everyone. But if you choose to love, if you choose grace, if you choose mercy, then you will experience the world through those lenses. And you will grow into those things. You will grow into love, into mercy, into grace. Our choices as to the sort of people that we will be shape our character. And our character in turn shapes our choices, and we get locked into this vicious cycle. And that's what Jesus has said has happened here. And so he tells parables. Sound like they're having fun outside, don't they? You can go and join them if you like. Parables, like all good stories, they are memorable. They are entertaining. They engage the heart as much as the head. To go back to where we started the service. And they're intended to provoke self-reflection. The kind of self-reflection that leads to change. Change in ourselves and change in communities. Stories can be a very powerful agent for change. Think of Mr. Bates versus the post office. You know what I'm talking about when I mention that? Most of us do. We've seen that on the telly, or if we haven't seen it, we've heard about it. That horrific, really, in a sense, of a whole series of sub-postmasters being persecuted for theft and fraud, yet the problem was with a computer system. And the post office knew that the problem was with a computer system. And the fascinating thing is that the ITV drama did not reveal any new information. There was nothing there that was not already in the public square. And yet pretty much nothing had been done. But frame the story as a drama about real life people. People we can identify, people that could be us if circumstances were different. And suddenly everything changes. This is not the way it's meant to work. These organizations are meant to look out for us. And thankfully it looks like those who were the victims in this are going to get some element of justice at least. Stories are powerful, aren't they? That story, think of what it did. My favourite parable, I think it's a parable anyway, in the whole Bible comes from the book of 1 Samuel. It's a story about a prophet called Nathan. And when Nathan confronts King David, you remember how King David effectively steals Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, and arranges for Uriah to have an unfortunate accident. These days it would have probably been a car crash or something like that, where, you know, these things happen sometimes. Anyway, God sends Nathan, the prophet, to confront David. And when he gets there, he says to David, I want to tell you a story. Settle down. Sit comfortably. I want to tell you a story. And he tells him the story of a rich man who has many sheep and cattle, and a poor man who has just a single ewe. But the poor man loves that ewe and treats it like part of the family, until one day the rich man throws a feast, a party for a visitor. Instead of using his own sheep, he takes the poor man's ewe and kills that. And when David hears the story, he is furious. This is not right. There must be justice for that poor man. Who could do such an awful thing? Who is this man? And Nathan says to David, you are. You are. This is what you have done with Uriah and with Bathsheba. And the penny drops, and David is horrified, and David repents. I don't know about you, but when I've done something wrong, or get criticised, we all become self-defensive, don't we? We seek to justify ourselves. We put up all sorts of barriers, all sorts of explanations in our mind. But Nathan just totally cuts through all of that. And David is changed. And David is brought face to face with what he has done. It's just brilliant. Brilliant how he does that. But stories are powerful. The economic psychologist, I didn't know we had economic psychologists. But this guy, Daniel Kahneman, is an economic psychologist. And in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he says this: as much as 99% of our decisions, including the most important choices in our lives, such as our choice of spouse, career, or home, are made on the basis of highly refined algorithms that we can call experiences, emotions, and dreams. Does that surprise you? We think, or we like to think, that we're very rational people, that we're fact-based people that make well-thought-out decisions on the basis of facts and pros and cons and all of that. But actually, most of the time, our decisions are based on stories, on experiences, on feelings, on our worldview. That's why stories are so powerful. That's why, for instance, Coca-Cola spends millions of pounds a year linking its sugary drink with happy, healthy, and active young people, rather than regaling you with pictures of overweight diabetes patients in hospital on a drip. We know the truth. We know how much sugar is in that stuff. But we still drink it. Images are powerful, aren't they? It's interesting that these days it feels like increasingly politicians are more interested in creating narratives than facts. Because narratives are powerful and much more interesting than facts. Listen next time you hear politicians speaking. That happens so much. It's all about the narrative. Which of course means that we can be manipulated by storytellers. Think of Hitler. Gaslighted a whole nation and created a narrative with awful consequences. But people bought into it. The stories we live with, our own worldviews, can be healthy or they can be destructive. They can unite us in good ways or they can leave us perpetually divided. They can inspire our hope, or they can feed our fear. Stories at their best are powerful purveyors of truth and agents of change. And Jesus' parables are intended to invite us to reimagine our lives through the lens of the kingdom of God. A friend of mine used to describe parables as being a bit like depth charges, just waiting to blow your mind. And then suddenly something happens and whoosh, that eureka moment, the light bulb moment. So do join us as we boldly go and explore this strange new world over the coming few weeks. But as you do so, remember that any act of communication, there are two partners. There's the speaker and the listener. And to allow the parables to do their stuff well, we need to listen well. Remember that passage at the beginning? There were those who did not listen well to Jesus and who completely missed the point. We need to learn to listen well together. I think she's listening rather than putting her fingers in her ears. I thought she was listening. I'm having doubts now. Imagine, whoops, there we go. She's listening well rather than going like that. But you can it's not a lot of difference, is there actually? It's not a lot of difference between going like that and going like that. And it's maybe far too often we go like that rather than like that. The parables, in a sense, give up their secrets slowly. They require us to let go, to enter into a new way of seeing things. We need to learn to listen with our heart and not just with our head. I tend to analyze. I'm like Charlie. I'm good with my head. I tend to analyze things when I listen to them. I have this internal conversation, which is constantly asking questions like, does this make sense? Do I agree? What about this? What about that? Well, that's just not practical. Does anyone else do that? Or is it just me? Somebody please nod. But you know what it's like? We're listening, but at the same time we're having this discussion as we listen, analysing, making judgments, and so on. To listen with the heart, in a sense, means to quieten that internal dialogue, to quieten our mind, maybe to notice how this passage makes me feel. How do I feel about that? Maybe to think, which character am I here? Maybe I'm the bad guy. If we go to it goes more generally. When you hear a story about the Pharisees, do you ever ask yourself, maybe I'm a Pharisee? Or do we think, no, they're the bad guys and I'm the good guy? Maybe using our imagination to reflect on what that story, suppose this is true, how does this affect how I live? What difference does it make? To listen with our hearts, to listen. I guess listening well requires humility. In a sense, to hold our own convictions, our own preconceptions lightly. I often wish I could hear Jesus teaching the parables for the first time. They come with a lot of baggage, don't they? We've heard it so many. We think we know what they mean because we've heard them so many times. Imagine what it would be like to listen to them for the first time. To forget everything you've learned and just to listen. To recognize my own bias. I've got no bias. Perhaps we need to allow Jesus' parables to interrogate us. To challenge us rather than the other way round. Maybe sometimes a good question to ask is, do I want to simply confirm what I already believe? Or do I want to grasp new vision? Am I reading just to confirm what I already think is true? Or am I open to new truth? What is God saying to me now? What is God saying to us now here through that parable? And being patient. We like instant answers. Steve Stockman talks about giving truth time to marinate in our lives. As tea drinker, maybe give truth time to brew. You know, it's like when I like my tea a bit strong. You put water in it, it just takes a while till it gets there. Parables don't give easy lessons. And they don't give instant lessons. They take time. We need to chew over it. To return to it again and again and again. To chat about it with friends. What do you make of that? What do you think is going on here? To give them time to do their stuff. In my first sabbatical, about 20 years ago, I wrote some material for Spurgeon's College for their distance learning material. I wrote one of the modules and then spent a decade tutoring that model. So people would send me their essays and I'd mark the essays and try and come up with hopeful comments and send them back. And about half of the module was devoted to the Psalms. And I wanted the students to, I guess, to go beyond the head knowledge of the Psalms, to go beyond theories and propositions, to just enter into this world of beauty and prayer and honesty, where every emotion is validated and owned, and there's wonderful use of metaphor and language and picture and all that sort of thing. I guess to go beyond head again and how does this make me feel? What is this trying to do rather than what is it trying to say? I suspect I wasn't as successful as I'd hoped. But one of the things I learned over the period is that when somebody did an essay, the essay taught me more about them than it did about what they were writing about. Because it came with all their... Of course it did. We write from our context, but it came with all their context, all their theology, all their church background. And somehow they couldn't see the text that was in front of them because there was all that stuff getting in the way. It was very frustrating. Until I recognized that that's what I do all the time. And that's what we all do all the time. Listening well is flipping difficult. It's time to stop, I think, with just one final point. I don't know if any of you know the hymn For the Fruit of All Creation, written by a guy called Fred Pratt Green, probably about 20, 30 years ago. And there's a verse in that hymn that says this: for the wonders that astound us, for the truths that still confound us, most of all that love has found us. Thanks be to God. And I pray that as we explore the parables together, we will find wonders that astound us. So look out for them. And I pray that we will find truths that confound us, that stop us in our tracks and make us think, I had not seen that before. I wonder what that means. What do I do with that? So look out for them. Be prepared to be confounded, to see, to hear differently. And most of all, that love has found us. And I pray that most of all, as we wrestle, as we reflect the parables together, that we will come to know afresh the love that has found us, the love that invites us, that calls us into the kingdom, the love that is our home, the love that wants to dwell in our hearts and to change us and form us. Thanks be to God. Amen. I'm really, really looking forward to exploring these parables with you. So let's boldly go, where actually lots of people have gone before, but let's boldly go there.